A 16-year-old boy from the Bronx walks into a courthouse. His name is Ralph Lifshitz. Son of a house painter, lives in a cramped apartment near Mosholu Parkway. He fills out legal paperwork and walks out with a new identity: Ralph Lauren. But here's the crazy part. He didn't just change his name, he changed his entire reality. He couldn't afford the clothes he loved, so he faked being the kind of person who could. He worked at a tie company making $50 a week, but dressed like a millionaire. And 50 years later, that fake it till you make it kid is worth $11.9 billion. This is the story of Ralph Lauren, a Jewish kid from the Bronx who escaped bullying by reinventing himself, who sold ties out of the drawer, who created an entire fantasy world of old money elegance that never existed. So, how did Ralph Lifshitz convince the world he was born Ralph Lauren? Ralph Lifshitz was born on October 14th, 1939, in the Bronx, New York. His parents, Frieda and Frank Lifshitz, were Ashkenazi Jewish immigrants who fled Belarus. His father painted houses when he could get work. The family lived in a small apartment in the Norwood section. Life wasn't glamorous. It was survival, but young Ralph had a secret obsession: movies. Every Saturday, he'd escape to the theater. And there, in the dark, he'd watch Cary Grant glide through rooms like he owned them. Fred Astaire dancing in perfect suits, Katharine Hepburn in effortless elegance. On screen, clothes weren't just fabric. They were transformation. Ralph didn't just watch those movies, he studied them. The way a tie was knotted, the cut of a jacket, the confidence that came from looking a certain way. He wanted that, desperately. But there was a problem. His name in 1950s America, in a working-class Bronx neighborhood, Lifshitz was a target. Kids at school mocked him relentlessly. Teachers mispronounced it on purpose. Every roll call was humiliation. His older brother Jerry felt the same pain. In 1955, at 16 years old, both brothers made a decision. They walked into a courthouse and legally changed their last name, from Lifshitz to Lauren. Ralph later said it wasn't just about escaping ridicule, it was about stepping into the person he wanted to become. It wasn't just a name change, he explained. It was about shedding the skin of limitation. After high school, Ralph took business classes at night while working sales jobs during the day. He saved every dollar to buy expensive suits, clothes he couldn't afford, but wore anyway. I was always reaching for something I didn't have, he admitted years later. After serving briefly in the US Army, Ralph got a job at Brooks Brothers, then at a tie manufacturer called Beau Brummel. And that's where the dream began. In 1967, at 28 years old, Ralph approached his boss with an idea. He wanted to design his own ties. Wider, bolder, colorful, the opposite of the narrow dark ties everyone was wearing. His boss said no. So Ralph borrowed $50,000 and started his own company. He called it Polo, not because he played polo, he'd never even seen a polo match, but because polo represented everything he dreamed of: old money, English aristocracy, country clubs. A world he'd only seen in movies. Ralph Lauren was selling a fantasy, and the first product was ties. Ralph rented a single drawer in a showroom in the Empire State Building. That's it, one drawer for his entire inventory. He filled it with colorful, wide ties, and he dressed like a millionaire to sell them. $50 a week salary, but wearing custom suits that cost hundreds. Buyers would walk in, see this impeccably dressed man, and assume he was already successful. People ask, how can a Jewish kid from the Bronx do preppy clothes? Ralph later said, it has to do with dreams. Within a year, Bloomingdale's placed an order. In 1968, Ralph launched his first menswear collection: classic tweed suits, English tailoring, American sportswear. It was aspirational, accessible luxury for people who wanted to look like they belonged. In 1971, he launched women's wear. The same philosophy: classic, timeless, elegant. Then, in 1972, Ralph created the product that would define his empire, the Polo shirt, a simple cotton mesh shirt, available in multiple colors, featuring a small embroidered polo player on the chest. It was genius. The polo player logo became a status symbol, not flashy, like other brands, subtle, understated, the kind of wealth that didn't need to scream. Ralph was selling what he'd always wanted, the fantasy of belonging to a world that didn't exist. Old money prep school elegance, East Coast aristocracy, country estates, and yacht clubs. Except Ralph had never been to any of those places. He was making it all up. In 1974, Ralph got the opportunity that would cement his vision. He was hired to design costumes for The Great Gatsby, the film about wealth and the American dream. Ralph dressed Robert Redford in perfect 1920s elegance. The film became a cultural phenomenon. 3 years later, in 1977, he designed costumes for Annie Hall. Diane Keaton wore oversized men's blazers, vests, and ties. Androgynous. Effortless. Cool. It became one of the most influential fashion moments in cinema. Ralph wasn't just designing clothes, he was creating cultural moments. In the 1980s, Ralph expanded beyond clothing. Home goods. Paint, bedding. You could live inside the Ralph Lauren fantasy. In 1986, he opened the flagship store in New York's Rhinelander mansion. Not a store, a mansion where you could walk through rooms like an English manor. By the 1990s, Ralph Lauren was an American institution. In 1997, Polo Ralph Lauren went public. Stock symbol RL. Ralph's fortune, over $6 billion. The boy from the Bronx owned a 12-acre oceanfront compound in Montauk. Multiple estates. A legendary car collection. Here's what makes Ralph Lauren's story remarkable. He wrote millionaire in his high school yearbook at 17. By any measure, he exceeded that goal by a factor of 10,000. Today, as of 2025, Ralph Lauren is worth $11.9 billion. The Ralph Lauren Corporation generates over $6 billion in annual revenue. But the real achievement isn't the money. It's that Ralph created a vision of American luxury that never actually existed. The prep school aristocracy, the country club elite, the old money WASP elegance. Ralph wasn't part of that world. He invented it. And then he sold it back to America as authenticity. People who bought Ralph Lauren weren't buying clothes. They were buying the fantasy of belonging. The illusion that if you wore the right polo shirt, you could be part of that imagined world. Ralph understood something profound. People don't want reality. They want the dream. In 2015, Ralph stepped down as CEO, but remains executive chairman and chief creative officer. He still controls the vision, the aesthetic, the fantasy, because Ralph Lauren isn't just a brand. It's a worldview. A belief that you can reinvent yourself, that a Jewish kid from the Bronx can become the arbiter of WASP elegance, that Ralph Lifshitz can become Ralph Lauren. He faked it completely. He wasn't born into the world. He created it from movies and magazines and imagination. He couldn't afford the clothes he loved, so he borrowed money to buy them. Anyway, he worked for $50 a week, but dressed like he was worth millions. And eventually, the world believed him because Ralph understood the ultimate truth about success. Perception becomes reality. If you dress like you've already made it, people assume you have. If you sell a fantasy convincingly enough, it stops being fake. Ralph Lauren proved that you don't need to be born into the life you want. You just need to believe in it hard enough to convince everyone else. He changed his name at 16, not to hide who he was, but to become who he wanted to be. And 60 years later, nobody remembers Ralph Lifshitz. They only know Ralph Lauren, the man who turned a Bronx childhood into a billion-dollar fantasy. The man who proved that the American dream isn't about where you start. It's about what you're willing to become. If this story inspired you, hit subscribe and the bell icon, so you never miss Another billion-dollar reinvention story. Drop a comment. Would you change your name to reinvent yourself? And check out our video on Giorgio Armani for another iconic designer who built an empire from nothing. Thanks for watching.